Today, I'm going to show you how to write a book with AI in 2024. While it may look like you can just write a book with the push of a button, anyone who's actually worked with AI knows it's not that simple. Hello, my name is Jason. I'm the Nerdy Novelist, and I made my first video on this channel in response to so many people out there making videos about how to write a book with AI, and it was clear from an author who's written multiple books at this point and who has worked for the last couple of years at Kindlepreneur, which is one of the largest websites about writing and self-publishing your books. It became very clear to me that most of these people that were making videos about how to write books with AI knew nothing about what they were talking about and had clearly never written a book in their life. I have. And so in this video, I'm going to be giving you the step-by-step method to write a book, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, using AI. And then I will show you two different methods that I believe are the two best methods to actually get the prose out and onto the page. Now, before we do that, I want to answer the question, should we even be using AI to write books? Now, I know this is a controversial question for a lot of people, but here's my take on it. A lot of people view writing as a single thing that you do, when in fact it is actually a multi-step process. It involves thinking, brainstorming, it involves outlining, it involves developing characters and developing your world. It involves research. It might even involve travel. It involves, of course, the actual mechanical act of typing the words out onto a page or writing them down by hand if that's more your style. It involves multiple types of editing. We have developmental editing, we have line editing, we have proofreading. That's just the tip of the iceberg. And that entire process is something that we call writing. Most people are not going to need to use AI for every single step of that process. And in fact, what I recommend is that you pick the area that you love the least and choose to learn how to use AI for that particular step of the process. And for other areas that you love the most, make sure those are the areas that you spend the most time on yourself. What this is going to do is it's going to maximize the amount of creative pleasure that you get out of writing, while also making it a little bit easier on yourself so you don't burn out, which is what happened to me several years ago, and which AI was able to help me with. But that said, I'm going to show you how you can use AI in almost every step of the process in this video, so let's dive in. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about the tools that we're going to need, but there is a video that you can check out at the end of this video to know what tools are the best tools for writing fiction. However, my general recommendation is that you have one tool that is specialized for the type of fiction or nonfiction that you want to use, and then a specific chatbot to help with basically everything else. The two most common chatbots are Claude and ChatGPT. However, you also can use other tools such as OpenRouter or Poe to access multiple different models within one service. Now, generally when writing a book, I recommend a prompting strategy called the fractal technique, which is very similar to another strategy that existed long before AI called the snowflake technique. And in that technique, you basically start with a small idea, and then you expand that idea into something larger, and then you expand that into something larger, etc., 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 until you have a fully fleshed out manuscript. I'll give you an idea of what that looks like right now. I'm going to use a random brainstorming prompt. You don't have to use this particular one. Any kind of prompt to get your ideas flowing will do. Give me an idea for 10 news stories set within a 1920s New York setting that could be used as the basis for a hard-boiled detective story. And now it's going to give me 10 news stories for a 1920s New York hard-boiled detective story. Socialite found murdered in her luxury apartment on Park Avenue. Police suspect her jealous husband or lover. A politician is caught up in a speakeasy shooting. He claims he was there trying to close it down, but rumors swirl, and so on and so on. And then we get a whole bunch of these ideas, and you might start piecing them together. So let's say we want to do this one. A reclusive millionaire art collector is killed when a precious painting is stolen from his Fifth Avenue mansion. You now take this and say, please flesh out number 6 into a full synopsis with a 3-act structure. And that's a simple version of a synopsis prompt to get a full synopsis out of this. And you can see how this goes, right? We take Act 1 and expand that into a more larger series of chapters. Then we take chapter 1 and expand that into a larger series of beats. And from the beats, we create our full prose. Now, there's a problem that happens at this stage. And the problem is that we might take a look at this and it's a little too generic, or it's lacking creativity, or what have you. And so one of the most important things that you need to do, and one of the reasons why AI is not going to replace authors, but is instead kind of a junior writing partner, is that you have to spend a good amount of time validating these words and making sure that they are good. And so I'll give you an example of what that looks like here. So let's say we take this synopsis here into Microsoft Word and we say Edmund Charles Claridge III is a waspish, eccentric millionaire who lives in a palatial yet gloomy Fifth Avenue mansion stuffed with priceless rare art, which no one ever sees. He keeps all visitors out and leaves the house only for occasional trips to obscure galleries to buy more precious paintings. One morning, Claridge's longtime butler enters the locked study to find his lifeless body slumped over his desk, a decorative letter opener stuck in his back, and an empty space on the wall where his newly purchased 2 million Rembrandt painting hung. All right, not a bad opening, kind of generic though. And so one of the things we might want to do is say, like, what are some more creative ways that we could make this better? And you can just write that in right here, or you can say, please brainstorm 5 ways to make the opening hook more creative. And then you let Claude or ChatGPT, whichever chatbot you're using, give you a few ideas. And from those ideas, that you can then pick and choose, oh, that sounds good, or that doesn't, whatever it is you want to do. Now, the other thing you might be asking is, what about nonfiction? And with nonfiction, the fractal technique works as well, but it's going to be a little bit different. With nonfiction, you might start out with a simple idea of a message you want to share or something you want to educate people on. And then you ask ChatGPT for a number of ideas for chapters that you want to include inside of that book. For nonfiction in particular, you have to be careful about the actual accuracy of your text, which is something you don't have to worry about too much for fiction because it's fictional, but it can give you a really good rundown of possible chapter types that you want to have within the nonfiction book. And then what you can do is within each chapter, you then ask the AI to brainstorm an outline for that chapter. And then from there, you can go into actually writing the entire thing. I'll open up another chat here in Claude to give you an example of what I mean. So let's say I already have an idea for a nonfiction book I want to write. And so all I would do is say, please give me a list of, we'll say, 30 possible chapters for a book about dopamine fasting. So we don't necessarily need to get to the synopsis stage. We can kind of skip from idea to a fully fleshed out outline. But then what we want to do is, like with the synopsis for the fiction, we want to go through these and make sure that they are actual topics that we want to write about. I cannot stress enough, you should not be writing nonfiction about topics that you are unfamiliar with. And I know some of you are going to be saying, well, if you're already familiar with it, what do you need AI for? And the reason you need AI is because it is a productivity assistant, not something that's doing the work for you. It is assisting you. And so it can give you ideas. You look at these 30 chapter types and you say, oh yeah, these are all really great things to cover, but maybe this chapter isn't really relevant, or this chapter is kind of repeating itself from an earlier chapter. And you just go through and pick and choose the chapters that you want, and then sort of figure out in what order they should go. And then let's say we're ready to write one of the chapters. Let's say foods to avoid during a dopamine fast. All right, number 7. Let's say we're writing that chapter right now. Please give me a list of topics to cover in chapter 7. And since we're using the same chat, it knows the context of what chapter 7 means. And so it's able to give a very clear list of topics to cover. So define what foods are considered stimulating and should be avoided. Discuss avoiding processed foods high in sugar, unhealthy fats, and chemical additives. Explain why foods like cake, candy, soda, and junk food should not be consumed. Talk about cutting out or limiting caffeine intake from coffee, tea, and energy drinks, and so on and so forth. And it does a really good job. And if you're an expert in the field, you'll be able to know, like, yes, that's a good one. No, that's not a good one. And you might be able to also add a few. Chances are going through this list will help you really understand what you should be doing. It'll help you add some things that you might have missed, but it'll also prompt you to add a few extra things that you with your expertise already know. And then from here you can say, write the first 500 words of this chapter if you want to do prose. However, this is a rather inefficient way to create your prose. And that brings me to the two methods that I believe are the best to actually write the prose for you. Let me reiterate that you don't have to use AI for this process, but if you do, I'm going to show you the two best ways to do so. The first is writing it one section at a time. The second is writing entire chapters all at once. And there are pros and cons to each. The writing chapters all at once requires often a little bit more advanced prompting, which I am going to show you later. So the first one, let's talk about going step by step. I'm going to use a tool called Novel Crafter, which is specifically for fiction, but you can find other tools that are similar for nonfiction out there, or you can just use ChatGPT to do this. ChatGPT is actually set up pretty well to run a similar situation to this for nonfiction. But basically, what we do is here in Novel Crafter, we can add what's called a scene beat. These are similar to these individual bullet points that we want to cover. So in this case, we say Cinderella runs from the ball and forgets her slipper, right? And then we generate the prose. In Novel Crafter, you can pick which model you want to use. I'm going to use Claude 2, and it starts writing this particular scene. Cinderella burst through the grand doors of the palace ballroom. Her heart pounded in her chest. The chimes of the tall grandfather clock at the top of the grand staircase began to ring out, signaling the start of the midnight hour. And so what you can do is you can just wait until this finishes generating. So after it's finished generating, you have a whole bunch of text, and you can basically say, hey, obviously this part here is where it says, here's a 900-word continuation of the story. You can get rid of that, and then you can edit this to your heart's content. For instance, in this particular version, it cuts halfway through and says, back at the palace, the prince wandered dazed through the thinning crowds. Let's say we don't want that part. So we just get rid of that. And we edit this up because AI typically is not great at natural sounding prose. Claude 2 does seem to be the best model for natural sounding prose, but it's usually very over the top and requires a lot of editing. So what you can do is you can go through, edit this down to your heart's content, and then put in the next scene beat, and it'll pick up immediately from where you left off. And the nice thing about doing it this way is that when you're doing the second scene beat, it will look at your first scene beat, especially if you're using a tool like Novel Crafter, and it will see the style of your writing. And then it will continue in a similar style. It won't be exact, but it will be much closer to something that you want, which means that as you go, each section will require less editing because you've already edited the last little bit, and it can see what you did and understand that. In a tool like ChatGPT, you can do this in a similar fashion where you just give it a number of story beats and say, write 500 words of these story beats. And then you can give it the next couple of story beats and say, write 500 words of this. And you just move one step at a time that way. However, it's a lot less inefficient in a chatbot like ChatGPT or Claude. Really, it's great to have a tool like Novel Crafter to really handle it for the specific situation that you're in. So that is the step-by-step approach where you're kind of editing it as you go. However, there is another approach that I find to be maybe even a little bit more fun, although somewhat less efficient, and that is writing an entire chapter at once. Here's how you do that. Introducing this super prompt. This is an example of a super prompt, which is in essence a very long prompt that you take and you stick into, usually it's Claude 2.0. It's the only one that can really handle this. The latest versions of ChatGPT can also handle this. However, they tend to export a little bit less words. So with Claude, you could actually potentially get 2,000 or 3,000 words in one go, whereas with ChatGPT, you might only get around 600. So it depends on your needs and what you specifically ask for. But I'm going to be demonstrating this with Claude. So this is an example of a fiction prose super prompt. I have instructions here that says, using all of the information on chapter beats, overview, setting, and characters, write 50,000 words of a chapter with plenty of detail and deep point of view. use the style to determine the prose style of the output, follow the chapter beats exactly, etc., etc., etc. Lots of instructions here. And then here I have the style that I want it to write in. Then I have a space to add characters, and I have a space to add the setting, and a space to add the overview, and a space to add the chapter beats. The way this works is I add information about the characters here, I add information about the setting here, I add information about the overview of the chapter here, which is just one small paragraph about the chapter. And then I have the chapter beats, which is the bulk of this whole thing. I'll show you an example of what this looks like when it's all filled out. This is an example of a chapter from my book, Heirs of Dracula, which I live streamed the entire thing. You can go ahead and check it out on the channel. But I have the instructions here. I have the style here. I have a list of characters here, right? And then the setting and the overview. And then here's my list of chapter beats. All of these were generated with the help of AI, but not exclusively. I did, in fact, these chapter beats I actually wrote myself. So they were not written with the help of AI, although sometimes I will ask AI for a specific section that I might be stuck on. And so that all goes into here. And then I take this super prompt and I go into Claude. Now, one thing I should note is that Claude 2.1, which is the most recent version of Claude, does not do well with the super prompt. And so I always come here and go to Claude 2.0 instead. Then I paste in the super prompt and hit go. And then here it goes, and it's giving me a full chapter using the prompt that I gave it. Now, in this case, it's doing an odd quirk where it adds paragraph numbers here. It sometimes will do that. And in fact, one of the least precise things about the super prompt is that sometimes you do have to run it multiple times in order to get something usable. And so sometimes you can actually spend like a good half hour just rerunning the prompt over and over again to get the right thing. However, you can, in many cases, get the entire chapter generated in one go. However, these days with tools like Novel Crafter, I think this method is a little bit less efficient. Because with Novel Crafter, you're able to run the entire thing and you're able to do basically everything that a super prompt can do. Because over here in the codex, you can add characters so that it knows about the characters. You can add locations for the setting. And there's all sorts of different things you can do to get the same effect, but you're editing it as you go, which means it's not going to get derailed as easily as it might here if you're using a super prompt. However, there is a nonfiction scenario where I do still use the super prompt and I love using it, and that is for online articles. And I'll show you an example of what that super prompt looks like. So this is an example of a super prompt for an SEO informational article. The instructions go, I want you to write a 30,000 word informational article for your topic. By the way, the reason I say 30,000 words is because I really want it to stretch. This only works with Claude 2.0. So if you're using this with a GPT-4 model or with Claude 2.1, you would need to put in a lower number that's more realistic. But with Claude 2.0, you can actually get some good results by telling it to have massive amounts of words. So an informational article about your topic here from a first-person perspective. Use I when describing your feelings about the subject just to kind of make it a more personal article and yada, yada, yada. And then I have the style here. And then for an SEO article, I like to make sure it has a list of keywords. And I will instruct it to include the keywords 1 to 4 times, depending. And then we add the article outline. And this is where I will actually go through and manually add all of the headings that I want the article to have. And this is one step that I do entirely myself based on my own experience as an SEO writer, because I know what really a good article outline should look like. So I'll just stick that all in there. And then I will give it examples of other articles that cover the same topic, because we want to make sure that it has all of the background information that it needs to have. And in case you're wondering about plagiarism, I have never, and I've tested this almost every time I've done it, I have never found that the AI plagiarizes the other articles when you do this. And believe me, I have checked. That's an example of an SEO article super prompt, and you could do something very similar for a nonfiction book chapter. So those are the two different ways to actually write prose. You can do it one step at a time, where you're editing as you go, or you can use a super prompt. However, the super prompt is pretty limited. It can really only be used with Claude 2.0 and not any other model. At least as of the beginning of 2024, As always, AI is an ever-evolving system, and so that is why this is the second time I've created this video, because everything needs to be updated now and then, and I will probably make it again before this year is over, as new models and new tools come out. Now, you might be asking, why would anybody actually want to write a book with AI? Well, in my experience, I went through a very severe period of burnout, and AI was actually the thing that sort of prompted me to get back into writing a little bit, because it was able to help me blast past a lot of those resistances. And I found that most of the people who follow me on this channel have some kind of resistance that they're struggling with. Maybe they're dealing with burnout like I did. Maybe they have some sort of neurodivergence like ADHD, dyslexia, or autism. Maybe you're just really stuck on a part of your writing and you need to get past that writer's block. The point is, AI can help you at every stage of the process. It can help you with brainstorming. It can help you with outlining. It can help you with doing research. Like, research for a historical fiction novel will never be the same because now we have AI to help with that process. The same goes for nonfiction as well. And I really hope that this has helped you understand that AI is more of a tool. It's a productivity tool to really help you be your best self when you are writing. And that it's not a tool that will be replacing writers in any way. And in fact, other people know this. In the writers' strike that happened in 2023, a lot of people think that they were against AI, when in fact they weren't. The results of the writers' strike led to an agreement that meant that the studios would not be replacing authors with AI, but that the power of using the AI would be in the hands of the authors themselves. That was what they were fighting for, so that the authors could be the ones benefiting from the AI and not the studios. And I actually think that that is the best way for AI to be thought about. It is a tool for the authors to really excel far beyond what they would be able to do otherwise, and with less headache. I've said this before and I've said this again. AI is a mind saver, not necessarily a time saver. And in my ongoing quest to be the best storyteller ever, I'm going to be using every tool at my disposal. Now, if that was useful for you and you would like to know more about the actual tools that I use, I would recommend looking at this video right here, which will walk you through my favorite tools for writing fiction. And I'll see you in the next video.